What's your relationship with the universe?
Well, I live in it to start with, so it's a pretty intimate relationship. I am part of it. Arguably, we are the universe's consciousness, in that we are made of all the same matter that makes up every rock circling around every, other planet, star out there in, 13.7 billion years of universe. And as far as we know at the moment, we are the only conscious beings that have self-knowledge, so are aware of our predicament. My painting is about exploring space, pictorial space, and I use the devices of outer space and architectural space and science and religion to explore that. You have to play, you have to push the boundaries, and in that you run the risk of failure, and there are failures, and the failures are multi-leveled, and but you have to wear those as kind of badges of honor, and the trick is to attempt in some way to learn from them. All I would say is, just do, don't get too trapped with, there are so many pressures with, particularly I think now, and in all wars, I don't think it's a preserve of art making or, the art world. There's so many pressures in terms of getting results of success, what it means to be successful, or what's seen to be successful, So the success is just doing, is just, getting up another day and having the privilege of practicing,
This week on American Real, we welcome to the set world-renowned artist Giles Alexander. I continue to be amazed by the context of conversation that takes place when sitting across from a fellow human being. Giles provided a rare view into the depth of his work, which includes his fascination and understanding of nature and the cosmos. In the artist's statement from his recent exhibit titled Eternity, Far Away, So Close, he says, "This body of work continues to reflect upon existential themes. Who are we? What is our place in the grander scheme? Is there a knowable truth?" He goes on to say, "In my practice, along with figurative clarity, I am compelled by what cannot be seen or can be seen only with technology." We discuss his unique technique, the necessity of failure in order to grow, and the privilege of practicing. I now invite you to sit back and relax as I welcome Mr. Giles Alexander.
This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks. My guest today is Giles Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to upstate New York.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here.
What's your initial impression?
Very beautiful. I had a lovely drive up yesterday morning. I have been to upstate, but I was informed last night that it was not upstate at all. People call it upstate, but now I'm genuinely upstate. I think I was only about an hour and a half out of Manhattan last time. So, no, very beautiful. It's lovely to be here in Binghamton. Yeah.
And last night there was a very nice exhibit, a private showing of your latest work, which is here in the studio where we set up. What was that experience like for you?
It was very intimate, very generous. You know, people were really appreciative of my work. I got to engage with people, which I think is really important, and actually speak to people one-on-one, and the intimacy of the event and the occasion, you know, afforded me that opportunity. So it was really, really good. Yeah.
So there's about 12 pieces in this exhibit.
Yeah.
About how long did it take you to produce?
You know, I guess in terms of direct work on this show, it's probably a good 7 or 8 months, and then of course that's off the back of years and years of development and blah blah blah. But it's probably at least 7 or 8 months work. Yeah, in the studio. And
are you when you go to work, just so people understand your routine a little bit?
Yeah.
Are you an early riser? What's your
I am,
typical
because
day
I have
like?
a 9-year-old son. Yeah, look, I have actually a very workaday kind of routine. You know, a very, dare I say, business-like routine. My wife's an academic. We have a beautiful growing son who, since year dot, has demanded getting up. He's just about broken the 6:30 threshold, but usually through his whole life it's been between about 5:45 and 6:30. But look, I love that part of the day. I love spending time with Bruno early in the morning, and you wake up and have a lovely morning routine. We live in a beautiful neighbourhood in the middle of Sydney. Great access to everything. I can walk to the Opera House. I can get a bus to the beach. I mean, it's really very, very special, very idyllic kind of, little village atmosphere. Bruno's school is 2-minute walk around the road. We know all our neighbours. It's lovely. And then from there, I set off to the studio once, I've dropped Bruno off at school. So, yeah.
And for up-and-coming artists who may be watching or listening, what does it take, both from a mindset standpoint and just confidence to be able to do this as a profession, to do what you love?
Confidence is an interesting word. I mean, what it really takes is just diligence and determination and work. And, this is, and I've said this a few times on this trip, and I've said it before, but the word that I keep coming back to is practice, and I come back to my son again, he's learning to play the piano and the clarinet, and I very early on I think it's very natural for kids, for us humans, to think, he thinks he can play the piano and the clarinet because he's picked it up a couple of times ago. I've done that. And so getting that idea of practice, and I say to him, I go to my studio to practice. It's all practice. I mean, it's not about the destination. I mean, it's the oldest one in the book, but it's not about the destination. It's about the journey, and the journey is the rewarding bit. You have to remind yourself as an artist, as an exhibiting professional, commercial, dare I say, artist. Someone who, look, I'm commercial in the sense of there's a prerequisite to selling my work because that enables me to make more work. So there is that pressure there, and you're aware of those pressures. But the process, the actually practicing, that's the gift, and that's the beauty of it. So all I would say is just do. Don't get too trapped with there are so many pressures with, particularly I think now, and in all walls. I don't think it's a preserve of art making or the art world. There's so many pressures in terms of getting results of success, what it means to be successful, or what's seen to be successful. You know, with social media, you know, there's all these, you know, all these targets you're meant to hit, and that's not real success. But you have to remind yourself that. So the success is just doing. It's just, you know, getting up another day and having the privilege of practicing, you know, having a daily ritual of being an art practitioner.
And as part of that practice, the word I think about as well is consistency. Mm-hmm. Because it's one thing to practice, but you have to be consistent in that practice, right? Yeah. Daily. Yeah. If not 7 days a week, maybe it's 6 days a week or 5. Yeah. Is that
that
consistent?
I have to say is, I have to look, for me, it's been pretty effortless. Really, my whole life. I guess at an early age, I became defined by you know, this idea of myself as an artist. I got an art scholarship to a prestigious school very early on that my mother, you know, I thank eternally for, put me forward for. I mean, I always painted with my father. My father's an architect, so it was a, you know, it's a logical progression. You know, I saw it always as a possibility. But this scholarship, I guess, consolidated in my mind, you know, I guess defined me very early on. Well, that's what I do. That's what I'm here for. And really, since then, yeah, it's always fairly effortless. I don't have to kind of will myself on to, you know, where am I going to find the drive to. Every so often, I get a little blip in the road where, you know, there's a small flat spot, but it's pretty few and far between, and usually the problem is far too many ideas and not enough time, rather than the other way around. So yeah.
And that's human nature, right?
Yeah.
If we didn't have those little blips.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then I think that, well, on that, you know, as you get older, as you become more experienced, it's, you know, it becomes a case of not only being present to those blips, but actually somehow trying to not take advantage of, but really try and process those blips, because they're there for a reason.
And embrace them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I am there, but I am open to that as a possibility, and trying, I guess, to work on what those blips can teach me. Yeah.
Giles, let's talk about influence. You said you received a scholarship at a young age. Yeah. So art has been part of your world for probably as long as you can remember,
sure.
Right? Who were some of the artists that influenced you? What was, if you could take us back to those early days, do you recall?
I do. I mean, look, in no uncertain terms, probably my biggest, you know, enduring influence is my father. So he, as I say, he was an architect. He painted his whole life and continues to now. My earliest memories, it sounds so kind of almost corny, but my earliest memories are genuinely sitting in, you know, little vineyards in the south of France on a little easel beside my father on his easel and painting, you know. And so that's a really defining kind of, you know, memory. But then beyond that, when I guess I started really taking notice in art, I guess, you know, the Impressionists were very big. When I was at a kind of pivotal age, you know, in the 90s in London, there were lots of retrospectives at that time. It was just the start of these kind of blockbuster shows that were coming through. So there was an enormous Monet retrospective, great Cézanne retrospectives, which I was, you know, really, really taken with. And I was lucky enough to travel a fair bit with my family, so we travelled a fair bit in Europe. And I think, you know, all of that lit the imagination. They're very accessible, the Impressionists. I think that's why they have this enduring That's why they're so universally loved. And that's not to belittle them. What they did when they did it was truly, earth-shattering in terms of, the history of art. As I grew up, I became more interested in kind of earlier art. I've always been very, very interested in religious art.
Such as?
Well, so, I mean, really the history of art is almost like a catalogue of man's religious life. I mean, the church, and we're just talking about Western art here, the Catholic Church is, probably the greatest art collector, or
Example, right?
yeah. I mean, all of the great masters you can poke a stick at. Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, and then through later and later, everyone was painting for the church. So, but I had a really pivotal visit to Florence on a school trip when I was 17, and interestingly enough, I'm just about to revisit Florence in the next month, and I'm so excited about that. Wonderful. First time I've been back since I was 17. Yeah. So yeah, look, literally too many to mention. You could ask me to be specific. I should probably be specific, but it seems a little bit random. I'm very eclectic, really, with my tastes. Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned in the past that Spanish artists have also influenced you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Who are some of those?
Goya, Velázquez, El Greco, most definitely. They have this kind of, El Greco particularly has this kind of heady ecstaticism. I mean, he was essentially painting religious, by and large, religious themes for, donors, for clients. But there was this really very kind of guttural, ecstaticism going on, which I think is a very kind of, I mean, as his name suggests, he's not originally Spanish. He was from Crete, I believe. So, and El Greco, the Greek. But he made his name and I think became, very successful artist in Spain. And yeah, really kind of tapped into, I think, that hot and heady kind of, Iberian Peninsula, psyche, and yeah, I love that work. Very intoxicating.
What is it about the relationship between a collector and an artist, whether they're here today or have been from 100 years ago?
Yeah.
What is it that if you have a piece in your home or in your office, why are we so attracted to that? What does it do to us, to our psyche?
It's a very interesting question. Maybe you're asking the wrong person. I'm on the wrong end of the question. I mean, look, that's legitimate. I am a collector myself as well, and I have, I'm in a great position. I swap lots of artworks with friends, and it's a lovely thing to do. And those works in my house give me great, they provide meaning to my life. They act in some way as kind of signposts and markers to, represent points in my life. But that's all from a very personal point of view. And beyond that, I think, as an artist, I really respond to the technical aspects of those artworks, and knowing the artist is always a very kind of special relationship. I think that's become. It seems to me in the last 5 or more years, 5 or 10 years, there seems to have become a greater emphasis on the relationship, the direct relationship between artist and collector, and I think that's in part due to the internet. The gallery previously was almost, it it acted as a more kind of rigid intermediary body between the two, and I don't know. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions here. I think there seems to be a more fluid connection between artist and collector, and galleries are well and truly recognising that. And I think it's being appreciated that everyone can benefit from that relationship. And yeah, certainly many of my collectors I know personally as friends. And I mean, I had a great connection last night with someone who bought my favourite work in the exhibition, which I'm really thrilled about. And to have that personal connection, which is why it's so valuable for me to be here on the ground.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example. How often does that happen where you actually meet the person buying your art? Does that happen more often than not? Or?
The majority of the time.
That's great.
I make a point of being at virtually every opening I have work in. It was very strange actually, because this exhibition opened a couple of weeks ago, but then we decided, or John and Anthony decided when we started talking about the exhibition, that there was a kind of synergy between the work I was proposing and the Luma Light Festival, which is in town this weekend. So we decided to have the artist reception, etc., this weekend. So I held off and I didn't come for the when the work was initially installed, and it was quite bizarre not being here, because I think that's the first time that I've kind of taken that tack. But yeah, the value of being here on the ground. I've had presentations with these guys in Miami, and I've been out there a couple of times. Back in New York with Louis Mizell, and I think it's a lot of value in being there.
So let's dive into your work, which is just incredible. I did have the ability to see the exhibit when it opened last month.
Yeah, right.
So we came in for that first Friday, and we'll definitely show some of these pieces so people can see. But the one behind our wall here is just incredible. What's your relationship with the universe? Because that's
well, I live in it to start with, so it's a pretty intimate relationship. I am part of it. It is part of me. I mean, it's a really interesting. We kind of tend to think of the universe and the cosmos as out there, and forget that we're all sitting on this little rock, hurtling at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour through the universe. We are part of the universe, and I mean, as an extension of that, it's a fascinating kind of mental conundrum for me, a very fertile area of to mine, that arguably we are the universe's consciousness, in that we are made of all the same matter that makes up every rock circling around every other planet, star out there in 13.7 billion years of universe. And as far as we know at the moment, we are the only conscious beings that have self-knowledge, so are aware of our predicament. So in a really staggering sense, we are the universe's consciousness,
I've never heard it put that way, but it's true.
Yeah.
Right? It's true.
Because we know so little about the brain. We've just grazed the surface. We know a lot about the mechanics of it, but we don't know about consciousness. We don't. It's such a grey area, if you forgive the pun. There is, who knows? It's a fascinating area, though.
Tell us about Cecilia Payne. Is that her name?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you know about her?
Well, I know that she, of course, tragically has not quite been written out of history, but certainly has not been given her fair dues. She arguably should be, should roll off the tongue in the same way as Einstein or Newton, or it's a massive contribution to our knowledge of our cosmic habitat. So she, and I'm sure people will kind of correct me on this, I tend to take broad brushes, as I believe is my right as an artist. I don't have the brain power or the credentials to be an academic, but I take an academic approach to my artwork. So I am fascinated with ideas and theories, etc. But her contribution was she was really the first person to figure out what the sun was made of, and figure out that the constituents of the universe, and how much what percentages of those constituents of helium, hydrogen, etc., made up the universe. So, which is pretty staggering stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I noticed that on your Facebook that you posted something about
Yeah.
her. So I did some research.
Right. Yeah.
I was curious because, case in point, I never heard of her.
No.
It's
Well,
such a
you never heard of
significant
her because, unfortunately, essentially because she was a woman, and she was. I think she was born into a reasonable kind of upper middle class family who had means, but she was seen and deemed as just a girl. So I think she had to really fight for higher education, which brought her, I think, essentially to the US, when she was the first woman to get a PhD.
At Harvard, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
First, I think, person to get a PhD in astrophysics, or so many firsts, and yet she's a name that we don't know. And I'm working on an artwork which bears her name right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Gives me the chills. I had no idea. Wonderful. We'll bring her name to life through this conversation as well.
Yeah. Okay,
so many of your works are focused on planets.
Sure.
And I guess that's where I was going with that initial question. What's the fascination? What are you trying to express?
Yeah. Look, I think it's kind of a two-pronged approach. Essentially, I'm trying to express my sense of belonging. Okay, so, I've mentioned earlier that I went to boarding school, which probably set up a certain, psychosis and a certain kind of, on one hand, it gave me a terrific sense of confidence in art as a possibility for my life. I'm fairly sure without that scholarship experience, I probably wouldn't be here today. At the same time, it, in no uncertain terms, wrenched me from a loving and secure family life, which, and I think of that now in terms of my own son, who's just turned 9, and the idea is just like abhorrent. I just could not possibly go through that. And, it's a mixed feelings. I have both kind of, I'm in some ways confused and about that in terms of my parents' decision making. At the same time, I'm incredibly grateful. So it's I'm a complex adult with baggage, but so I am really looking for belonging. I have subsequently serendipitously, to be honest, relocated myself to the opposite side of the earth from my place of origin. So I live in Sydney, lived there for virtually 20 years, which seemed like a natural thing to do after the boarding school experience. I think very early on, I came to the idea that, the world is my oyster and I can kind of live anywhere. And I've been very lucky. I have a beautiful, loving, family home, great family. My wife's family in Sydney are amazing, very generous, and I feel loved and cherished, in that environment. But nevertheless, a fundamental part of me, the defining part of me, is from elsewhere. And so I guess my work is really about exploring that. And I I look at that, I guess, through the lens of us as a species and how we have both historically and continue to today find meaning. And though the two, as far as I can see, the two kind of main projects of man that hinges on is religion and science, you know. And so I look at the cosmos, our kind of furthering exploration of that, and I look at religion through architectural spaces, which obviously harks back to my experience with my father, but also both of them operate for me fundamentally as a realist painter. And probably the overarching project of realism is the depiction of space on a flat surface. You know, it's an illusion. It's kind of the oldest trick in the book. You know, since the invention of perspective in the Renaissance, which is just convention that we've all learned and accepted. Okay, you know, we've even got it here in the backdrop, and you know, it's everywhere. It surrounds us all the time. We look straight through it. We don't even recognise it as a trick, which is exactly what it is. So yeah, my painting is about exploring space, you know, pictorial space, and I use the devices of outer space and architectural space and science and religion to explore that.
Awesome. And then you add another element to this, and that's motion.
Yeah.
Where did that come in?
That came in so much as, you know, I guess I keep coming back to this idea in my mind of a bit of perspective, which I think we could really do with in the world at the moment. We live in very bizarre, very reactionary times where in a certain sense the world seems to be contracting, and it's becoming very protectionist, and you know, everyone's kind of very guarded, and you know, even though we have all this interconnectivity and all of this great knowledge of everything that's going on around the world, we're all kind of looking over our shoulder, and we just need a bit of perspective. And you know, that's, I think, you know, the planet paintings is kind of, I think for me, an opportunity just to, you know, present the idea that we're just this tiny infinitesimal little rock floating around in space. As soon as you come off, you know, take ourselves off the confines of that, and we've only ventured as far as our nearest little rock, which on the cosmic scale is nothing whatsoever. But as soon as you step away, our ideas of up and down, left and right, our whole idea of the electromagnetic spectrum, which you know, our eyes register a tiny part of, it all flies right out the window. So yeah, introducing that kind of motion into the works was a way of kind of exploring that as an idea.
Well, that's fascinating. And again, I'm going to refer back to the piece behind us that we'll show. I love that piece. Can you explain a little bit about the process?
Yeah.
What are you actually doing? Because I look at it, I admire it tremendously and think, how did this happen?
Yeah. Look, there's an idea there that I'm trying to convey. So, you know, there's a process of, you know, exploring a concept. Then the actual physical process of painting is actually really rather traditional, and I'm more than a sucker for. I greatly admire, you know, old world painting, arguably much more so than the vast majority of contemporary painting. I, you know, personally, give me a Bellini over, you know, a Warhol any day of the week. I mean, I love that age-old inquiry, that you know, slowly sought, you know, approach to honing a craft over years and years and years, and which is so kind of absent in today's society and not valued as far as I'm, you know, not that valued as much as I think it should be. But so I take a very kind of slow, traditional approach to the actual application of paint. But then I guess I kind of willfully distort, but I play and push that fundamental process by using this very toxic, very nasty but very kind of contemporary materiality, which is the resin, which I coat many of my works with. And that sets up a few things. Firstly, it further kind of blurs the boundary between the handmade and the mechanical or digital, which is very much where my work kind of inhabits. I think it's slightly unfortunate in some ways, because very often people see my work as an image. When they first see my work as an image online or something, I think the assumption is very often that it's produced mechanically, digitally in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that response is compounded very often the first time they experience it in the flesh, and then slowly the penny drops and they kind of realise, okay, it's handmade. And I welcome that kind of little grey area, so I'm kind of playing and treading that line. The resin also sets up this very kind of interesting, multi-layered and ambiguous spatial quality, whereby it at once kind of makes you almost painfully aware of surface, because you see your reflection in the surface, and every time you move, the whole thing is moving, and you as the viewer are implicated in the work. But by extension, it kind of creates a fictitious space as well, because you're aware of the whole room that's kind of reflected behind, like a mirror. So yeah, it's a little bit, it's an intangible thing, which I like about it as well. The painting is so explicit, so realist, but the resin, is at once kind of, hyper realistic, because it's virtually impossible to paint a painting that is any more real than a mirror reflection. But at the same time, it sets up these really intangible, spatial ambiguities, which, you can't quite pin down.
And you have some diversity in your work as well.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the different types of art that you do?
Look, you have to play. You have to play, and you have to be prepared to fail as well. I mean, and for me, certainly, there's more successful works here than others. I mean, that's just on my own personal, what I'm trying to achieve, and some come together more. I mean, that's always the case with any body of work. I was deliberately playful with this body of work. John and Anthony well and truly kind of gave me complete carte blanche and said, you go for it, and we're happy to present what you would like to present. So that was a great opportunity. But you have to play, you have to push the boundaries, and in that you run the risk of failure, and there are failures, and the failures are multi-leveled, and but you have to wear those as kind of badges of honour, and the trick is to attempt in some way to learn from them, rather than kind of constrict and become fearful. And if you're not playing, then for me in this business, if you're not playing, then I really don't see the point. If you're just churning out products, then that can work. Horses for courses, people get off on different things, and I'm not projecting the rules for other people, but for me personally, I have to be exploring, I have to play, and so very seldom do I present exactly the same body of work over and over. I just couldn't do that. It drives me nuts.
And the piece that you mentioned earlier that sold last night has a black hole, if you will, in the center. Is that kind of a part of it? Because that's what I felt when I looked at that piece.
Well, it's a painting based on the image of a black hole. So we just this year, for the first time, imaged a hole, which is a bit of a conundrum.
Right.
I mean, it's a beautiful, amazing thing. Like, just technologically, just thinking of that. I mean, the thing is, millions and millions of kilometers, so light years away. We've finally, honed our technology to get this really blurry image of, a black hole devouring matter. And what you're actually seeing from the image is like a heat signature of the matter that it is chewing up and devouring. so there's this real conundrum there of what is actually being represented, and for me, look, that work, the image and the painting of based on that image ticks so many boxes, because it's at once a realist painting, but the resource material is so blurry and it's so essentially abstract that it can just exist purely as an abstract, object, and then to punch a hole through the middle, through the the picture plane, and extend that sense of space, and some works just come together. It's really quite, it's small in scale, it's very concise, and that for me is I'm particularly pleased with that work. So I'm very, very chuffed that that collector got that piece last night. She was very pleased with it, and we had a great conversation. So
That's wonderful. Can you tell us about some of the books that you read?
Mm-hmm.
You sound very versed, in a lot of this. Are you interested in? Do you read about the universe?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've actually, I think for most of my life, I read non-fiction. I've only really recently come to fiction, interestingly enough. But I look, for much of my late teens, early 20s, I read almost exclusively kind of physics and astrophysics, either books or publications. I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's completely the reverse to my wife, who's an academic, and she only reads fiction. And I think it's so interesting because I think it makes complete sense. I'm like a sponge absorbing information and kind of ingesting it and then spitting out some kind of artistic creation of that process. Anna, my wife, is she is producing information, and to release and to kind of she needs, like, I guess, the poetry and the creativity of of fiction. But what I have really come to appreciate is that fiction, like good fiction, poetry, says so much more than the data. Good writing, getting an appreciation, getting a grasp on that, having an appreciation for. I'm actually at the moment reading Wolf Hall, so I'm a massive. I mean, I think it's because I'm a self-imposed, exile Brit living in the New World. I am such a sucker for period dramas. I've just lap them up. But I love history. And so Wolf Hall is an amazing book by Hilary Mantel. And I think won Booker or one of those big prizes. And there's actually a series of 3 of them. And it's about Thomas Cromwell, who was this incredible, it's all based on historical, individual. So Thomas Cromwell was the just wily, just super kind of instrumental personality of Henry VIII's court, and arguably is very much responsible for England becoming so powerful in that Tudor period and going on, to become such an instrumental part of Europe, etc. And he was the son of a blacksmith, beaten all shades by his father, awful relationship with his father, became this very hardened but incredibly worldly, and travelled a lot. And there's a great TV adaptation of it as well. But I'm reading that at the moment, and that's an example of the fiction that I like to read, which is it's based on historical data, if you will, but says so much more than than me just reading through reams of history. And on the other end, I love books like,